I do hope you can see me today from where you are.
Ich bin ein Ehrlich.
If I'm generally anything, I guess I'm generally miserable. This modern world of science and invention is of particular interest to women.
The people, I would say, there is no patent. Would you patent the sun?
I regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
Welcome to the Biographers.
There was a day we were going to record on a Sunday, and you're like, I can't do it. And I was like,
it might have been
that day,
time or something,
But no, I know what you mean, because okay, you know how there's like that joke that's like, there's two types of people, early birds and night owls, and they marry each other. I'm neither. I go to bed early and I sleep later. Aaron is both.
Interesting.
He can sleep on it's 5 hours of sleep and he's good to go.
Weird.
He's not tired. I need 10.
I've known people like that. Like when I was a teenager, I worked at American Eagle, and this one dude who was one of the managers was telling me that he would sleep 3 hours a night, and that was all he needed. It was just like a little bit to recharge the battery, and he's good to go. And I was like, I think you're going to die when you're 40. I don't think you're going to be around for a whole lot longer, my friend.
I mean, there's some stuff around dementia and stuff where it's the more sleep. I don't know. I can't remember now. Quote medical. Don't ever listen to our medical. I read some study. I think it's if you didn't get enough sleep, then you might get dementia. But also if you got too much sleep, I don't even know.
Oh, dude, the studies they've been coming out with sleep recently. I mean, the funniest thing is they can tell us all this stuff and we won't do it. So they're like, hey, blue light. Enemy of sleep. Don't look at a screen. If you can wind down for 2 hours prior to bed and not be looking at any form of screen, this is ideal. They're saying this is science. This is what they're finding. And then they keep going further past that. Okay, but if you can't do that, make it an hour. Okay, if you can't do that, do a half hour. If you can't do that, I don't know what to tell you, because you need sleep. And the more sleep you get, the better you're going to be. And so we just don't do it. We're like, yeah, but I like falling asleep to The Office in the background.
I like falling asleep from scrolling so much on Instagram that my eyes just fall asleep.
Exactly. But
yikes.
Anyhow, I guess that's probably a good segue. We never have a good segue for saying welcome to the Biographers, but here we are. Welcome to the Biographers, everyone. I'm Daniel Newman.
And I'm
with me,
Aubrey Hicks.
Aubrey Hicks. I want to say Boss Lady McCarthy, but
I go by all of those things.
It's okay. I think that's a fun nickname for you.
Boss Lady McCarthy?
Boss Lady McCarthy. I've been calling you that for 5 years now.
That's fine. I can be that.
Well, Aubrey, are you ready to get into the last part of Ian Fleming?
I'm actually kind of sad.
I am too. He's been fun, right?
Yeah, he's been really fun.
He's been really fun.
I was talking to my mortgage lender who reached out because it was just my birthday, and he gets a notification, oh, it's your client's birthday. But then I talked to him for a while and I told him about the podcast.
Yeah.
And I was like, but it's Ian Fleming and you're going to really like it. Because I feel like this is definitely a guy's series, but also not. I'm very interested, but I don't know.
We're going to talk about it at the very end of this episode. I write down some of my own thoughts, but I wanted to do Ian Fleming because I just sort of feel I don't care who you are, man. Every person, I would almost argue, near on the planet knows who James Bond is, or has at least seen one of their movies, or one of the James Bond movies, rather. And I didn't know anything about him other than when the movie credits would pop up, it would say Ian Fleming's Casino Royale, Ian Fleming's this and that.
I never even noticed that.
Yeah, it's there on almost, if not every one of the movies. I can't confirm that, but most.
In Bond, at least, it's weird with new movies these days, and maybe it's because I just pretty much stream them, but most movies don't have credits anymore at the beginning.
I don't know. I feel like they do.
I feel like the Bonds do, because they always have the Bond song, and then they do the cool Bond opener.
So clarify. Do you mean that movies aren't doing the whole opening sequence where there's maybe a little bit of an overture song and then some credits that are happening?
Yeah,
James
that's
Bond?
what I'm talking about. At the beginning, I
thought you were just saying
the
that
actors,
there aren't actual credits just on screen at the beginning. And I was like, no, I'm pretty sure.
I'm talking about an actual... it's here are the actors. This is casting by Jean McCarthy, who I don't know if is a cousin, but I always just see her name because she spells her name the way my middle name is spelled.
Yeah.
And she's might be a cousin. And then all the different things, and produced by blah, blah, blah. And then it probably says based on Ian Fleming's Casino Royale.
Yes.
And they don't do that anymore. We were just watching Hunt for Red October, And they do that. And I was like, oh yeah, this is like not really a thing.
Or I think of like, you know, the director David Fincher, who did like Panic Room and Fight
yeah.
Club.
I mean, I know those
and
movies,
stuff
but
like
yeah.
that. Well, Panic Room is actually, I think, a bit of an underrated movie.
Panic Room's a great movie. It's
thought it
got
was really
Forrest
good.
Whitaker, Jodie Foster, and then young Kristen Stewart, which is weird.
And it's a really good little story. But
It is a good story.
if you
Forrest
remember,
Whitaker,
oh, I know, he's great.
it's a great.
But if you remember, the movie starts out and it has this sort of credit sequence where it has these like the lettering, like 3D lettering against skyscrapers in New York.
I don't remember, but it's been a while since I've seen it. But
It's really cool, but that's another good
Like
example
those
of it,
sorts
where
of
it's
things,
like,
yeah.
or even a good example would be something like what am I thinking? West Side Story,
Yeah.
right? Where it's like it shows all of the overhead images of New York to just sort of set the scene as it's showing, you know, credits and everything. So
Yeah.
I feel you. I know what you're
But
saying.
I just don't think they do that anymore. I'm actually
think
trying to
so.
remember. I know Barbie has that big intro where it's like Helen Mirren is narrating, and it's like the other movie, but I don't why am I not thinking of the movie where it's like the girls are smashing the dolls, and it's actually like a complete, almost to a T.
You're thinking of 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yes, it's that. I was going to say the wrong movie, and I didn't want to have like a Mission Impossible moment here. But anyway, I don't even remember. No, it does. She does have the getting ready thing, and it does say like actors and Greta Gerwig in Barbie. But I feel like a lot of the movies just don't.
I agree. I think it's the new trend is basically it's either
because we have no attention span.
I agree. And I think that
What?
there's
Just kidding.
I think there's just not a lot of want for it anymore, because like when I go to a movie, it's one of those where I'm like, all right, come on, I don't need to see this intro song or whatever. Like if it's a James Bond movie,
I want to get to the movie.
I will watch it because it's a James Bond movie.
Yeah, because they do it really well.
They do it really well, and it's a good song usually by a popular artist of
Yes.
the time. But like, I feel like the new trend is at most like the first movie that comes to mind is Midsummer, and all it does at one point is just
I
goes
never
like,
saw that.
boom, Midsummer, and it just says it really big, and then there's like a picture behind it to kind of give you an idea of like the sort of feel the tone of it or whatever, you know, and then it just goes right back to the movie. So that I think is the new sort of way that people are doing it. It's just like
people
quick
just
in and out,
jump
done.
right in.
Or my new favorite is they won't even do it at all, and then the very end of the movie it ends, and then it says the name of the movie.
Yeah, I feel like that was like kind of maybe an old thing too. Anyway, whatever. We should get on to Ian Fleming.
We should. We've been talking for a little bit. So without
long.
further ado, let's get into the conclusion. And we actually have a good amount to talk about here, so we'll try our best not to interrupt as much as we can. I have like an extra page to go through today, so let's get into it. Now, the last time we saw a 44-year-old Ian Fleming finally settle down and marry his longtime love affair, Anne Charteris, after Anne again became pregnant with his baby. A few months prior to the birth of his son Casper, Ian sat down at his typewriter to start work on a novel, with the end result being Casino Royale, where James Bond made his first appearance. Now, just about a year after its completion, Casino Royale was released in the UK to generally positive reviews and sales, which spurred Ian to write 6 more books before 1960. The general consensus amongst reviewers and readers alike was that Ian's 5th James Bond novel, From Russia with Love, which was published in 1957, was his best work yet. Despite being relatively tired of writing James Bond novels and having some doubts, Ian never fully gave up his faith in his project's ability to jump off of the page and onto the big screen. Now, where we left off last time, Ian was attending a dinner party with a friend in Washington, D.C., which happened to be hosted by John F. Kennedy.
I've heard of him.
Yes. Now, thankfully, Ian represented himself well as both an intellectual voice on a broad range of topics and a well-researched and respectable author. So now, we are in 1961, and on January 20th, JFK was sworn in as the 35th President of the United States at just 43 years old. I know that there are some listeners who remember when JFK was president to one extent or another. Maybe you were a kid or a teenager, or maybe you're a senior right now and you knew him and voted for him. I don't know. But if anyone out there doesn't understand the cultural significance of JFK, completely apart from his assassination, I want to take a moment to explore it. So rewinding a few years, let's talk for a second about air travel.
Oh.
Now, since 1914, commercial air travel has been available to the public, but for the first 35 years, it would be uncomfortable, dangerous, and very expensive. But in 1949, the Comet 1, the world's first commercial jet, would take its inaugural flight. About 3 years later, the British Overseas Aircraft Corporation began offering travel by jet planes instead of propeller engine planes, which cut down travel time drastically. For comparison, the fastest propeller-driven airplane at the time was capable of reaching speeds up to 180 miles per hour. But the Comet was able to reach speeds up to 480 miles per hour. And in 1957, Boeing released the 707, which could get up to, 604 miles an hour.
Okay.
So we're going from 180 miles an hour to 604 miles an hour.
3 times as fast.
In 10 years,
plus,
basically.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, with this new advent, world travel in general changed in a way that humankind had never seen before. People with enough money could now board a plane at night in New York, wake up in London for breakfast, have lunch in the Swiss Alps after some morning skiing, stop off in Milan for some dinner, then meet some friends in Madrid for a nightcap. Additionally, air travel was no longer physically exhausting, as the new jets were engineered to be vibration-free and pressurized. So, it was no longer seen as a manly, quote-unquote, form of travel, and women were now taking to the skies like never before, oftentimes accompanied by their rich spouse. This new breed of ultra-wealthy world travelers became known as the jet set, and they were generally seen as the coolest of the cool. I really don't want to make this comparison, but if I were to make a comparison to modern day, I would probably compare the jet set to somebody like the Kardashians.
Okay.
I hate making that comparison, but it's true, okay? Now, I tell you all of this kind of information because JFK, along with his wife Jacqueline, or Jackie to most, were both poster children for the jet set, as they both came from wealthy family lines. After John was elected as Massachusetts Senator in 1953, John and Jackie Kennedy made headlines throughout the 1950s, regularly being interviewed by various magazines and fashion journals to discuss the latest vacation hotspots and international clothing trends. So these two symbols of the ultra cool were now the President and First Lady of the United States, and on an even greater level than before, all eyes and ears were on them.
Ultra cool.
Have you ever seen a picture of JFK back in the day?
No, I know. And Jackie O.
And Jackie O, dude. They were cool as hell. They just had it going on. They had that factor. You just saw them, were like, man, I want to be you.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that was them. And that's why I make the comparison to the Kardashians. Love them or hate them, you look at their lifestyle and you just go, dang, man.
I wouldn't turn that down.
That sounds pretty good. That was John and Jackie Kennedy. It was that big of a deal. And you have to imagine this was pre-internet. So it wasn't like there were swaths of people competing for that title. It was basically the media just went, yeah, you two are it.
Yeah. And they'd be in every magazine cover. Everywhere. And so people would see them. And
so, yeah, really important to know this, everybody, because, again, if you didn't know that outside of JFK's assassination, that was another reason why it was such an intensely sad thing when he was assassinated, was that it wasn't just, oh, our beloved president. It was, man, for 15 years, we have been following this iconic symbol of culture, really. So, again, really, really big deal, JFK and Jackie, and again, not just for their politics.
Well, and to be clear, again, no internet, so people used to go to these things called grocery stores, and they didn't have the food come out to their car. They'd go in, and they'd be in the checkout line, and they'd see, like, newspapers and magazines and look at them, and then they'd see these people that looked so cool.
Well, you and I were talking about this, weren't we? About how newspapers used to be published twice a day, morning and night. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, you can only imagine that it's like if every single day in a morning or evening edition, I mean, if let's even say 10% of the time, you're seeing John and Jackie Kennedy somewhere pop up on there.
That's like once every other week.
That is insane.
And on the news.
Yeah, and you're hearing him on the radio and all this different stuff. And then he becomes a senator and you're hearing about his work in politics as well. And so it was just this storm of like popularity, basically. So how does Ian Fleming wrap up into all of this? Well, again, destiny seems to play a part. About 8 years prior, in 1953, JFK was on vacation with some friends, got super sick and had to stay in bed for a few days. Remember at the end of the last episode when I mentioned Marion Leader? Mm-hmm. And how that was where Felix Leader's name came from? Mm-hmm. And that she was the one who took Ian to JFK's party in Washington, D.C.? Mm-hmm. Well, turns out she was the one who actually gave John the book when he got sick. Mm-hmm. She was on vacation with all of them. So this was right when Casino Royale came out. And she was like, hey, read this book. Okay.
He was an early adopter.
Very early adopter. Now, fast forward to 1959. JFK has read every single James Bond novel so far, and who should come walking into his door for a random dinner party one night but the author himself, Ian Fleming, accompanied by the very woman who gave him the original copy of Casino Royale.
So he was like, oh, this is awesome.
He was pumped.
It's funny for someone who's a star to be starstruck.
I know. Actually, really fast sidebar. I watched the Biggest Night in Pop little documentary all about the, what's that song called? We Are the World.
Oh, I don't. Yeah. I know the song. I just don't know the documentary.
It's really cute. A big part of the whole documentary is how all of the stars are starstruck by each other.
Oh, yeah.
It's really cool. Anyway, check it out.
Okay. This is just one last thing. Yeah. I was watching some of the clips from the Grammys, and they're showing Taylor Swift, like, watching. But it's funny because she's singing along with everybody. She knows every word to every song that all these other people are singing. But think about it. She's a busy lady, and she's sitting there like here listening to other people's music and learning the lyrics and knowing it. And I was just like, she's just one of those people who's like, she's a friend with everybody. She like wants to support other people. Like I just was thinking that was pretty cool. So I feel like Taylor Swift might be the only person that's not starstruck. Because she's like,
I think you're right. I think that of all the human beings in the world, there's probably only one or two that would not be amazed by Tom Cruise walking in, and I think Taylor Swift is one of them.
She might be like,
hey Tom, what's up?
Hey Tom,
high five, walk away.
I saw you at the blah blah, whatever.
I mean, I will move on. I promise in 2 seconds here, but I will just say quickly, I have never in my life, ever witnessed something like Taylor Swift.
No, none of us have.
It's not just the popularity; it is the like. Hey, she's popular, and don't you say a word. Nope, we're not hearing it. Don't say a bad word against her or we will riot against you. I've never seen anything like this before.
Also there's the stuff like they think that she's got like witchy stuff. Like if somebody like goes after her, like there was a football game earlier this season and they basically were like booing Taylor Swift and then they lost.
Oh, well.
And so there's
bad
like
juju.
I can't remember. It's like
no.
it's Swift juju. Anyway, I don't know. I just and she just like releasing a new album in the middle of the biggest world tour of all of history, and it's like wouldn't one of the hardest jobs has got to be like doing Taylor Swift's like scheduling.
Oh my god, yeah, I can't even imagine.
I was thinking like, who is this person that has to do this? It's probably a team of like 15 people.
Let's move on. Enough Taylor Swift. So, we just talked about Casino Royale and JFK. Now, fast forward to 1961. JFK has just taken office as the president. Life magazine asks him to list his top 10 favorite books, and wouldn't you know it, From Russia with Love shows up at number 9. Only 2 of the books listed were fiction, as we said in the last episode, and only one of them was a modern work. The other 8 books listed were nonfiction, either biographies or general history. So almost by process of elimination, the American public saw From Russia with Love as the new must-read novel of 1961.
New York Times best-selling novel that's not brand new.
Oh, just you wait. Now, for many years prior to JFK listing his novel as a favorite, Ian had been shopping James Bond around to various film and television studios and even managed to sell the rights of Casino Royale and Moonraker. Despite selling these rights, all of the studios thus far had sat on their hands with the intellectual property, apart from that 1-hour adaptation of Casino Royale that CBS did back in like 1953 or whatever it was. Now, I said it in the last episode, but I'm going to spare a lot of details about the behind-the-scenes negotiations that went on as Ian tried to get Bond onto the big screen. But one important thing to note. It seems that in Ian's constant attempts to get negotiations going, kind of shot himself in the foot as things started to get complicated really fast. Now, various studios, producers, lawyers, and writers all made some claim or another over the years that they were entitled to some portion of the James Bond pie due to some handshake agreement or non-specific contract that Ian had signed. This all resulted in some pretty serious and bitter legal battles that would go on for years, and many close friends speculated on how these lawsuits were affecting Ian's health. Ian's health, by the way, continued to be an issue over the years, with his continued smoking habit not being of much help, although you will be proud, Aubrey, he did manage to cut back from 70 cigarettes a day to about 60 cigarettes per day, and he had completely stopped with the whole 1 bottle of gin thing per day. Yeah, now he's on to one full bottle of vodka per day because he thought it was better for his health.
So you're like, when you were saying they were worried about how it was affecting his health, and I'm like, yeah, contract negotiations, binge drinking, and chain smoking together might be the trifecta of, oh my gosh.
I just think it's hilarious that somehow in his weird brain he was like, gin, that'll probably kill me. I'll switch to vodka.
Well, I mean, have you ever had gin? No,
I love gin. I'm a weirdo. I don't know. I think it's delicious.
People either love it or hate it, but and a lot of people had that one night in college where all they could get was gin.
That was me with vodka. The one night in college with vodka. Now I don't like vodka. So. Now, as you can imagine, his lungs were the big issue, no surprise. And he was prone to various lung problems and illnesses like bronchitis and pneumonia. The last note about all of these movie negotiations I'll make for now is that through all of these talks, Ian was tasked again and again to pitch an original James Bond story to the studios rather than adapt one of his books. But because of all these negotiations and how they all fell through, Ian was left with a nice handful of small James Bond stories, and rather than use each story for a novel, they would later compile them into a collection of short stories called For Your Eyes Only.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, if anybody's ever curious, if you look through like the canon of Ian's original James Bond books, 2 of them are like little short story collections. And if you ever wondered like what's the deal, was that a lot of people read them and were like, they're okay. They're just not really fully fleshed out. The reason is because they were movie ideas. And rather than him going, yes, I'll turn this into a full novel, he just went, well, let's just like zhuzh it up into a short story, turn this little movie idea that I had into a little thing, and then there we go.
Waste not, want not.
And that's exactly what happened. So if anybody is ever curious, he literally made those 4 movies. So they've been using those like ever since. Pretty cool.
Very cool.
Now, I should also briefly mention that in the late 1950s, Ian embarked on a quote-unquote journalistic tour for the Sunday Times, and that is a tour of the world, I should say, which became a recurring series of articles called Thrilling Cities. The idea was for Ian to travel around the world, visit a bunch of famous cities, and report on what things you might do in those cities if you were a person of his taste and sophistication. The cities Ian visited and reported on included Hong Kong, Macau, Tokyo, Honolulu, Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Chicago, New York, Hamburg, Berlin, Vienna, Geneva, Naples, and Monte Carlo. All paid for by his newspaper, by the way.
So is he like the first travel writer?
No. His brother was a travel writer, remember?
Yeah. True.
Yeah.
Okay.
So no, yeah, he's but you probably already guessed it. Ian was not using this world tour to actually write articles. He was using it as a covert fact-finding and writing inspiration mission that would help aid his imagination in writing more James Bond books as the years went on.
Yeah, it was like paid for research.
Exactly.
And probably in pretty like cush hotels.
Yeah, he did do the work. There are a lot of articles. We're going to talk about this in just a second. But one thing that you'll know about Ian Fleming, or that you should know about Ian Fleming, is that he did not want to write about anywhere that he did not very intimately know. So all of the places that he describes in any of his James Bond books, he has been there.
He went there and spent enough time there to really know about it.
To write about it. So if anybody ever does read the James Bond books, the mistakes are pretty few and far between. It's usually like very little mistakes he'll make, like, oh, you mentioned this one thing and that was actually only made last year, and the book is taking place 3 years ago. Like little like, nitpicky things, but like for the most part, he really is a very well-researched and descriptive
It makes
writer.
sense. He was a journalist.
Exactly.
So his job was to be accurate.
Exactly.
As was I a journalist, and my job was to be accurate.
Yes. Now, this collection of articles was later published as a travel guide in 1963, also titled Thrilling Cities. So if anyone out there is looking for Ian Fleming's guide to traveling the world, look for Thrilling Cities at your local bookshop. Now, after coming close to signing contracts on a movie deal, but again seeing the trail go cold, in late 1959, Ian was starting to consider killing off the character of James Bond. I know. By this point, Ian had written 7 James Bond novels, was growing tired of the character and even more tired of the genre. He wrote to his longtime friend William Plomer around this time, saying, quote, I used to believe sufficiently in bonds, blondes, and bombs, but now the keys creak as I type. Having a wife and child knocks the ruthlessness out of one. I shall definitely kill off Bond in my next book.
Oh.
He's basically just saying, like, I'm kind of too gentle now. Like,
yeah.
I don't have the, like, spirit for it because I got this, like, wife and kid that I'm looking after, and it just is, like, kind of makes me sad. So.
Changes your perspective a bit.
But that was going to be after this current book he was working on, definitively named Thunderball. Now, Thunderball ended up being a double-edged sword, as on the one hand, American critics actually liked this one. But on the other hand, Ian had written Thunderball based on a movie he had been developing with Xanadu Productions, which ended up sparking a legal battle over intellectual property. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes, but again, I'm trying to keep this one light on the legal stuff, but for anybody out there, just know Thunderball was a bit of a doozy for everyone. But killing off the character of James Bond, as we all know, never came. As I said a few minutes ago, in 1961, John F. Kennedy listed From Russia with Love as his number 9 favorite book. Smartly, Ian's American publishers jumped on the opportunity, pushed massive ad campaigns, and by the end of 1961, Ian Fleming was the number 1 best-selling author in the United States.
There you go.
Unbelievable. When Thunderball was released in the US on March 27th of that year, it quickly sold out and soon became the best-selling Bond novel to date. After almost 10 years of persistence, shoulder tapping, and maybe just a little bit of luck, Ian Fleming finally broke out of the relatively small literary world of the UK and was now basking in the rays of international stardom. If anyone needs an age check, he would turn 53 just 2 months after Thunderball was published.
Okay.
Which, we talked about this already, testament to not giving up. Right?
Yeah.
Continuing on and continuing on and continuing on. Not that he wasn't successful before this, but like this was the explosion that made James Bond erupt around the world kind of a thing. Now, quick sidebar about one of my primary sources for this series, with the book Ian Fleming, the man behind James Bond, and specifically the author Andrew Lycett. Now, in Andrew's digging, he found some correspondence where Ian, when he was doing some research, he was talking to a British genealogy expert as part of some research for an upcoming Bond novel. In the letter, the genealogy expert reports back to Ian that there was indeed a Bond family in the UK. Okay, specifically in the London district of Peckham. So they were aptly called the Bond of Peckham family. Okay. Now, further, the expert sent Ian the Bond of Peckham family coat of arms, and their family motto was, no joke, the world is not enough.
No way.
Not even kidding. Okay, now this is where it gets even cooler, okay? Stick with me. Andrew Lycett, when he writes this in his book, even calls the motto out as being very James Bond-esque, okay? Now, Ian never used that as a title for a Bond novel, okay? Never used it. And Andrew Lycett published his book in 1995, but the movie The World Is Not Enough came out in 1999.
Okay.
So my bet is that the producers of the movie read Andrew Lycett's book and then decided to use the Bond of Peckham family motto as the name for an upcoming Bond film.
Okay.
I have no proof of this, but it just seems way too coincidental.
Timeline-wise, it must be.
And again, he in the book, it's not even like and this is where the name came from. He goes, and it's cool. Their motto is this, and he goes, isn't that a very Bond-esque name? And moves right on from it. And I was like, wait a second, what's the timeline? And I looked it up, and it's like, the movie was 4 years later. There is no way that they didn't read
that
this
and say,
go,
okay,
oh my God, you're right.
I wonder
That's
what
a
the
great
Bonds
name.
of Peckham were thinking about that.
I don't know. I don't even know if they're still around. That'd be a good thing to find out. Hey, Bonds of Peckham, if you're out there listening, let us know. Give us a shout. Now, I mentioned a few minutes ago that the release of Thunderball caused a legal battle over intellectual property, and I also mentioned that Ian's health was in decline. Well, the combination of the two proved to be too much for Ian to handle, and in April, Ian suffered a fairly massive heart attack, resulting in a month-long stay in the hospital. Also, it seems that by this time, most of the medical community at large had gotten wise and were now telling Ian to completely cut out both cigarettes and booze, labeling both as, quote, poison.
Yeah.
Which I'm glad that 1961 finally recognized that. Mm-hmm. Now, for the most part, Ian was on strict hospital orders to stay in isolation in order to help him focus on resting. This hospital order also came with the sub-clause that Ian was not allowed a typewriter, again, to help him focus on recovery. However, on one of the rare occasions that he was allowed a visitor, one of his friends, we're not quite sure who, gave him a copy of Beatrix Potter's Squirrel Nutkin, a large pad of paper, and a pen, and then suggested that rather than working on the gritty world of spy novels, he should instead consider writing a children's story where his imagination could run free. This was actually a great suggestion for Ian, as for the past 5 or so years, he had been regularly expanding a fairy tale through his nightly bedtime stories with his son, Casper. Now confined to his hospital bed, Ian began to take notes on all the previous bedtime story details he had made up. Never having much imagination for dragons or talking mountains, Ian drew inspiration from his love of motor cars, especially the old ones from the 1920s. Also never having much taste for the old, Ian's story took place in the 20th century and centered on a family whose brilliant father, an inventor and former Navy commander, sold off his idea for a musical candy and used the profits to buy and restore an old 1920 Paragon Panther motor car.
A musical candy?
Thinking back to his theatrical storytelling as Casper drifted off to sleep, Ian remembered an important detail. Though the father in his story, Caractacus Pot, was brilliant, he was unconventionally brilliant and didn't have any formal training in engineering. As a result, during the process of restoring the old Paragon Panther, some strange modifications took place. Ian then recalled the moment where he dramatically told Casper the part of the story where the whole Pot family finally pile into the car and start it up for the first time. Partly because of these strange modifications and partly because the car is magical, Ian told Casper that the engine started up and ran in a funny-sounding way. As Caractacus fired up the engine for the first time, the whole thing began to shudder before the engine coughed to life with a rattle that sounded like... Cheaty, 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 cheaty.
I thought this was
bang, bang.
I thought this was where this was going.
Yes. For anyone out there that didn't know, the guy who created James Bond is also the guy who created and wrote Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
That is crazy.
Unbelievable, right?
That is crazy.
Now, true to form, within a month, Ian was sending copies of his completed children's story to his publishers. Now, this might sound strange, but to me, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang was Ian Fleming's Rosebud.
Okay.
Do you know what I'm talking about when I say that?
Yeah, I know it's like, tell me again.
So a little bit of like 60-year-old spoilers. Citizen Kane.
Yes.
The movie Citizen Kane. If nobody out there has seen it, quick little synopsis. It's about a man who comes from not nothing, but he brings himself up to be basically the most powerful man in the world, as rich as can be, politician, all these things. And at the very beginning of the movie, he's on his deathbed, and his last words are Rosebud. And you end up at the end of the movie, you find out the Rosebud was the name of his sled. I'm saying it's a 60-year-old spoiler.
I know. I still haven't ever seen it though.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
It's supposed to be like the AFI's #1 movie of all time, and you're supposed to have watched it, and I've never seen it.
It's for good reason. It's
I mean, it's just because I'm like, I don't know. Sometimes when it's something like that, you're like, okay, but like if I watch it, like,
no,
how am I going to think about it?
I saw it after I already knew the ending, and it didn't spoil it at all. It was just as magical. It's an absolute masterpiece of cinema. But the whole thing of Rosebud is it's his sled. And it's when he was a boy, he had a sled, and the whole point of the movie is the man who has everything dies, and the last thing on his mind is his sled from when he was a child. So if we look at the story of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, you have this former Navy commander, okay, who leaves the Navy and then creates this candy. It's not just any candy, though. It's a freaking candy that whistles. It is. If you've ever seen the movie Chitty Chitty Bang Bang or read the book, it's a whistle. Like you can play it like a little instrument, okay? So James Bond, it's not just a secret agent story. It is a freaking secret agent story that sings, baby. He made a candy that sings, sells it off, has all the things that he could possibly ever want in the world. But what is the thing that he's going back to all the time? Man, in his 20s, when he was ripping through the mountains in those old sports cars, man, when those rickety old 20 cars, when he was with Donald Healy doing the Alpine motor trials and stuff, like him going 100 miles an hour, him running into the train and it dragging him for 50 yards down the tracks, like... At the end of it all, he's not thinking about any of that stuff. He's thinking about the cars and the fun times he was having when he was young.
Well,
See what I'm saying?
And I think a lot of us do that too.
But anyways, I just as soon
There's
as I
a lot
got
of
to this
parallels.
point, yeah, and I read sort of like the description of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, the sort of story. I was like, it's a children's story, but if you kind of back up from it and look at it from the perspective of Ian Fleming, it's very poetic. It's very like, oh man, the thing that matters most to you is this just simple cars riding around having fun, Rosebud.
Yeah.
Anyway, just thought that was an interesting little thought. Mm-hmm. Now, the last thing to come out of Ian's hospital stay was, sadly, a rumor. Word on the street was Ian Fleming's health was only getting worse, and he probably didn't have too much longer to live. Now, since we just mentioned Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, that means we also need to mention, strangely, children's author Roald Dahl.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I bring him up because, firstly, Ian had been friends with Roald for some time, as Roald spent his time in World War II acting as a British spy in Washington, D.C., if you didn't know that, which is where he and Ian became friends. The two would keep in contact over the years, exchanging small ideas for stories to help aid one another in their respective creative processes, and occasionally meeting up for a drink. Because of their lasting friendship, Roald Dahl would be called upon not once, but twice in the service of bringing Ian Fleming's work to the big screen. First in 1967 by writing the screenplay adaptation for the James Bond movie You Only Live Twice.
Huh.
And again in 1968 for the movie musical screenplay adaptation of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. I didn't know this until
Which talks
recently.
to the scope of their minds,
Yes.
both of them.
And honestly, it is one of these. If you go back and watch Chitty Chitty Bang Bang or You Only Live Twice and you know that Roald Dahl was behind it, you're going to be like, okay, this makes 1,000% more sense than it did before. Little things like, have you seen the movie Chitty Chitty Bang Bang?
I don't think so. You know how it was when we were young? If you didn't have the VHS, you didn't see it.
So we did. It was one of my favorites as a kid. But one of the worst things about Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, the movie, is that towards the latter, like the last act of the movie, they're in this magical kingdom that has no children because the king and queen don't like children. They have a man whose name is the Child Catcher.
Ooh.
And he dresses like a goth, emaciated Abraham Lincoln with a nose that is 6 inches long, and he carries around a gigantic freaking net. And he hunts children, and he is the creepiest, greasiest dude ever. That wasn't even the book.
That just seems like something from Roald Dahl because
Roald Dahl was
the witches
we
and
need to have something insanely terrifying to just scare all the children away from this movie. So that was Roald Dahl with Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Okay.
He added all of that. So
Okay.
yeah, I had to look all of this up because I was amazed. So this was like 2 or 3 months ago. I was like, I texted you because you had mentioned that in the future at some point
might
you're
wanna do
thinking
Roald
about
Dahl,
Roald Dahl,
yeah.
and I wanted to tell you so bad. I was like, did you know? And I was like, stop, Daniel, stop, save. Okay, now moving on. So once out of the hospital and with Thunderball being a massive hit, Ian had a change of heart and decided it wasn't quite the right time to kill off Secret Agent James Bond.
I guess not. You don't kill off your moneymaker.
But he still wanted to try something different and decided to change up his format for his next novel, The Spy Who Loved Me, by telling most of the story through the eyes of Bond's love interest, Vivian Michael. And by the way, on that one, I think it's Michael. It might be Vivian Michelle. I'm not 100% sure. Just wanted to call that out in case anybody gets mad at me.
Not to be confused with Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me.
Correct. This is The Spy Who Loved Me. Now, the purpose of doing this, telling the story from the perspective of Bond's love interest, the purpose of doing this, according to Ian, was to tell the cautionary tale of James Bond rather than the heroic story. In recent years, the James Bond series was becoming increasingly popular amongst the youth, who were seeing James Bond as a hero, which was never really Ian's intent, as we have discussed before. So in an attempt to show Bond in a different light, and less glamorous light, to be frank, he wanted to tell the story from the point of view of Bond's love interest, who is being deeply hurt by Bond's actions. This shift in perspective was important, but sadly, readers just weren't ready for it, and mostly thought it was slow and boring, not understanding a James Bond novel that wasn't riddled with action.
Yeah, I guess he was trying to tone him down. Now he's a father. He wants people to be slightly more realistic. And like,
well, and like we've talked about before, he didn't mean for James Bond to be an example.
he's
was
like an
just,
anti-hero.
in a lot of ways. He's this sort of like, you kind of love him because you go like, oh, I can't treat people like that. But it's sort of funny to watch it on screen for a second and then go home and be a normal person. Well, people didn't really see that at the time. A lot of these young kids were going like, no, I'm going to be just like James Bond, and we're trying to emulate his actions. And Ian was like,
no, guys, don't do that.
Yeah, and so he literally wrote The Spy Who Loved Me to try to say, like, look at it from their perspective. This is not like just a great time for everybody. People are being hurt by this, you know?
Which is interesting because he definitely was a bit of a dog in his younger years.
But again, one of the reasons I like Ian Fleming is that he's a complicated guy.
Well, it's just like Mabel, and it's just like Queen Victoria. Like we when you look at someone through their whole life, we all have phases and seasons, and we all sometimes we're better versions of ourselves, sometimes we're worse versions of ourselves, and
totally.
People are just people.
We do what we can, you know. We mess up and then we do what we can. And
he was trying to rectify it a little bit here, but 100%. Also, you know, people do want to read books as an escape from reality, and so when you have it maybe too much of reality, not saying that there isn't a place for books that are like that, where they are thoughtful and they are. But yeah, I mean,
I would compare it to something like we've talked a little bit in the past few episodes about how like modern culture, it seems like in the 2000s and the teens and stuff has gotten a little bit meaner, a little more aggressive in a lot of ways. I think we're getting better now, but I feel like there was a long period of time where comedy was just angry, offensive, mean, whatever you could do to get under somebody's skin, and then as a society, especially in America, when a lot of young people would get into that type of comedy, it became part of the fabric of the society of, well, that's just sort of how we are. That's our sense of humor right now. I think Ian Fleming was kind of seeing that with his own James Bond novels at the time and going, I don't want to perpetuate that.
Yeah.
So let's make something to try to curb it if we can.
I'm actually, so it's funny, like I haven't read any James Bond novels. I probably might. It seems like I will. But out of all of these, I feel like I need to read one regular and then read this one and forget the rest, because I'm interested to see how he writes from a women's perspective, because there's like almost like there's like memes and jokes about like male writers writing women, and it's like, oh God, this is so bad.
Yes. And
so I'm kind of wondering, like, how did he do it?
I would say probably not well.
Hey, he tried.
Yes, but you also have to remember that he was not writing these stories, generally speaking, to like, I mean, look, times have changed. Things are different. He was writing these stories because he wanted to solely make out James Bond to be the hero. So all of the other dialogue was almost incidental to make James Bond look better, right? So it's like it almost didn't even matter what the female in the story would say, because it was only to the benefit of making the James Bond
that's why I
want to
read
you know?
The Spy Who Loved Me, because I want to see how he officially wrote it as
totally.
But yeah, I don't know. I wonder if it's on Kindle Unlimited, because I'm poor and I have my subscription, but I could also find it at the library. I know
it's also on our awesome research website that we use.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, which is our secret, because it's an awesome secret that we use for researching.
There's that.
Well, moving on. Now, all of this was much less exciting than what began to surface earlier that year. At the beginning of 1961, a Canadian movie producer who lived in London named Harry Saltzman received rights from Ian to pursue making a James Bond movie. Saltzman had been successfully running Woodfall Films for several years, but was still struggling to find financial backing for the new project.
So it wasn't Windfall Films.
No, Woodfall.
I'm sorry, I just saw an opportunity and I had to take it. I've been very quiet this episode per your direction.
No, this is right.
Windfall later.
Now, luckily for Saltzman, another producer named Albert R. Broccoli was in the market for
I'm sorry,
I was waiting for you to say
giggle.
I knew it.
I was taking a sip of it. I have a little Dr. Pepper here.
I knew it. I was like gonna say, I was like, oh, she's gonna laugh.
Well, that was perfect, because I love people named after vegetables or dogs, because my dog's named Zucchini. Broccoli is a great name.
So again, luckily for Saltzman.
Sorry. His first name was Cruciferous. Okay, bye. Sorry.
Okay. Oh yeah, no, I lost my spot. Okay. Luckily for Saltzman, another producer named Albert R. Broccoli was in the market for a new project after having to close the doors of his previous production company the year before. Together, the two men formed Eon Productions, whose sole mission was to create and promote James Bond films. At the end of June 1961, Ian, along with his newfound colleagues at Eon Productions, were signing distribution and funding contracts with United Artists that would make history.
I've heard of United Artists.
Oh, we all have. Harry Saltzman and Albert R. Broccoli deserve a lot of credit here, as they did their homework, they knew what everything was worth, and managed to squeeze United Artists for a 6-film contract. Unprecedented at that point, and not exactly common today. Ian was to receive a whopping $100,000 per film, in addition to 5% of all film profits.
Nice.
Unbelievable. For context, if converted to currency in 2024, Ian would be receiving $1 million per film guaranteed.
Plus 5%.
For additional context, to date, the James Bond film series, or franchise I should say, has raked in about $7 billion at the box offices over the past 60 years. If the profits on that are even at 25%, which is low, that's $1.75 billion in profit, which means Ian would be entitled to $87.9 million just on movie and film rights.
Huh.
And adjusting for inflation, by the way, that $87.5 million goes up closer to $140 million. Just for nothing. Literally having nothing to do with the movies, them just taking his rights, basically. And that's not even to do, like let's say these 6 movies were done and they signed a bunch more if Ian had lived long enough to see it go where it was supposed to go. Undoubtedly, he would have been able to get his royalties higher, and he would have been able to get more per film as well. So if he had lived into his twilight years, Ian Fleming would have been possibly one of the most wealthy entertainers on the planet.
Huh. So I'm guessing, though, his rights didn't extend to his family after his death, or something did. Oh, you'll probably get there.
Yeah, we're going to get into that at the end of this episode here. Now, because Thunderball was still under some legal scrutiny and Casino Royale's rights were already sold, the group settled on calling the first film Dr. No, as it was still riding the slight wave of controversy it had managed to create when released. Now, when it came to script writing, surprisingly, Ian was hands-off, noting that novel writing and journalism were his forte, not as much in rapid dialogue and script writing. But when it came to the actor portraying James Bond, Ian definitely had his opinions. His first choice was a personal friend, an actor named Peter Niven, who, despite never playing James Bond in any official capacity, would later portray James Bond in the 1967 parody of Casino Royale, starring comedian Peter Sellers.
Okay.
So kind of cool. Now, after catching a clip of the pilot episode of The Saint, remember the Val Kilmer movie from the 90s?
I was going to say, yeah.
It was a show from the 60s.
I didn't know that.
That was what it was originally. So after catching a clip of the pilot episode of The Saint, Ian was impressed with the star of the show and suggested that a young Roger Moore would make a good Bond. But the show was picked up by the BBC and Roger Moore was off the table.
Roger No More.
But we all know that he eventually became
he did become
technically the third James Bond. But,
okay.
Yes, he was
the first
longest
choice
running James Bond for quite a while there. However, none of Ian's suggestions mattered to Albert Broccoli, as he already had his heart set on a mostly unknown actor from Scotland named Sean Connery. To put it mildly, Ian wasn't convinced that this thickly accented Scotsman was the best candidate to play the upper-class English secret agent 007, so he set up a private lunch with Sean Connery at his country club to discuss the role. The two got along fine, and Ian was warming up to the idea of Sean Connery playing James Bond, but his mind was made up after they were randomly visited by the attractive cousin of Ivor Bryce named Janet.
Ooh.
After lunch was over, just before they left, Janet pulled Ian aside and told him that Sean Connery had to be James Bond. As Connery had, she said, quote, it.
He had it.
And we all know what that means.
He had it.
It's not that he was a great actor. It was mama likey.
Yeah. No. You gotta be handsome and suave Yeah.
This was all the final sway Ian needed and agreed that Sean Connery was to play James Bond.
That's crazy that his buddy's cousin was like, as a lady, let me tell ya.
Yes, literally. And if you think about it from his perspective, he's like, okay, if anybody is going to know this, it's not a bunch of dudes in a room.
Yeah.
It's a lady off the street that's attractive.
He was probably thinking like, this is an action film. It's going to be for guys, but also you want women to go too, because it's going to make more money. I mean, women drive the economy in so many ways. He was totally right on that move.
It was why Albert Broccoli wanted Sean Connery, is because he knew he could only get couples to go see the movie
if it was a handsome
man that a girl would want to go see. So Albert Broccoli was like, those other guys you're talking about, they seem fine. Their demeanor is fine. Yes, they're cute, but like, I want a honk.
Yeah.
I want a guy I want to take a bite out of. And it was like Sean Connery. Here he is, you know? And I completely understand. Sean Connery can get it, you know?
Okay, can I just make one totally side joke?
Of course.
Albert Broccoli and Harry, what's his face? Saltzman. Eon Productions, right? They totally missed out. They could have been Harry Broccoli Productions.
That's awesome. Eon Productions is actually a combination of their two wives' names. I can't remember what their names actually were.
A combination of their names. What's wrong with mine?
It's something like, it was like Eleanor and Marion or something.
Okay.
So it was like Eon.
I do like that.
Yeah.
It was the same thing I was doing, but I think Harry Broccoli could be something.
I think that would be amazing.
Harry Broccoli Productions.
But no, they had to be lame and go with combining the people that they loved.
To a word Eon, which is like a good word for a production company.
Know,
Jeez.
Right? Ooh, this part's great. Now, for filming locations, Ian was able to convince Eon Productions to use his beloved Jamaica as the backdrop for a huge portion of the film. Hilariously, Ian again shot himself in the foot when writing to the Secretary of Jamaica's governor, asking if they might be able to use the government building during filming. The governor's secretary quickly responded, saying that, given the governor of Jamaica is portrayed as a total buffoon in the film, in addition to the governor's secretary being portrayed as a spy, no, they could not use the government building to film in.
I think things had been going so well for Ian, he kind of like just forgot about logic.
Yeah, I know.
What if they gave him 5% of the profits?
Luckily, though, Ian had plenty of wealthy connections in Jamaica who agreed to let Eon Productions film on their property. Now, when it came to the actual production of Dr. No, Ian mostly stayed in the background but offered advice where he could. One of Ian's longtime island lovers, Blanche Blackwell, had a son named Chris, who was hired to be the location scout for the film, in addition to supplying the producers with all the best new Jamaican music of the day. So if anyone out there is wondering why the first James Bond movie has so much Jamaican music in it, it's because Ian Fleming wanted Jamaican music in it and got a kid with good taste in music to point them towards what was cool at the time. Oh, and by the way, that kid, Chris Blackwell, ended up having such a great experience in the entertainment industry, and specifically with music, that later that year, in 1962, Chris founded a little record company you might have heard of called Island Records. I couldn't even believe it when I read it. If you're not a music head, Island Records is one of the biggest record companies in the world still to this day, and their list of signed artists over the years have included, buckle up, Cat Stevens, Steve Winwood, Bob Marley and the Wailers, Sparks, King Crimson, Bon Jovi, Ariana Grande, Amy Winehouse, Bob Dylan, Def Leppard, Elton John, George Michael, The Killers, Mumford & Sons, Lil Wayne, Post Malone, Nicki Minaj, The Weeknd, U2, Insane Clown Posse, Janet Jackson, Jimmy Cliff, Ladytron, Mariah Carey, Nick Drake, Nine Inch Nails, Morrissey, Queen, The Pogues, Toots and the Maytals, The Slits, Tom Waits, Willie Nelson, and Nirvana, just to name a few. When I found this out, I went outside to Kat and I was like, you won't believe this. I couldn't believe it. So literally, the first song that Island Records ever put out was the single from Dr. No, 3 Blind Mice. The little 3 blind mice, here we go. 3 blind mice in a row. Like, it's this like calypso kind of style song.
Okay.
That's the first song that Island Records released. And they're still going to this day.
Yeah.
I couldn't. This was like this might be my favorite fact of the whole freaking series. It's like, no way, dude. Ian Fleming kickstarted Island Records.
Accidentally.
What? Like, I couldn't believe this. Like, the Killers were one of my favorite bands to this day.
I mean,
I couldn't believe it.
You had me at a lot of them, but when you said Mumford and Sons, because like, you wouldn't think Mumford and Sons would be with Island Records, but then again, you wouldn't think Nirvana would either, or Nine Inch Nails, to be honest.
But that's the thing, is that over the years they went from like, oh yeah, we're finding music on the islands, just like we're just a good record
just finding
company,
music,
and we're now just killing it. And all these artists came to them and they put them out in good ways, and now we know all these people because of them. So
that's awesome.
Oh man, that one made me so happy. Now, another fun Dr. No filming story came one afternoon when Ian and Anne were visited by a few friends at Goldeneye. Ian excitedly told his guests that just a few miles away, they were filming the first James Bond film right on the beach, and before long, the group decided to pay the movie set a visit. The four came strolling down onto the beach, headed for the crew, when suddenly they heard the enraged shout of film director Terrence Young. Terrence, who was directing Dr. No, shouted, "Get down!" So Ian and the group instantly flattened themselves against the sand. Apparently, Terrence had just called action on a fairly important and expensive scene in the movie. If anyone out there remembers the scene in Dr. No, where Bond and Honey Ryder, his love interest, take cover behind a sandbar as Dr. No's cronies shoot at them from the boat, yeah, Ian Fleming, his wife, and two of their friends are laying down on the beach somewhere in the background. You can't see them in the movie, but they're there. Apparently, Ian was so keen on not disturbing the scene that he insisted the group lay perfectly still in the sand for more than 30 minutes. Terrence Young finished the shot like 20 minutes before and had forgotten that they were there, so he had to run over and get them once he remembered.
That's funny. I was like, that's a long scene.
Yeah, so they were just like, don't move, don't move, don't move. And they were like, are you sure? And he was like, yes, don't move, don't move. And then like a half hour later, Terrence is like, oh, shoot.
Sorry, you could have gotten out 20 minutes ago. That's funny.
Now, while not at Goldeneye, Ian was spending as much time as possible in Sandwich, which is in southeast London, so as to be close to a specialized hospital when he needed treatment, but most importantly, to play golf and socialize at the prestigious Royal St. George's Golf Club, which is a very, very prestigious golf club to this day.
I believe it.
As the years passed, Ian became less and less excited at the prospect of intellectual debates and highbrow chit-chat, and found the golf club to be a welcoming and comfortable place where he could relax and be himself, in addition to playing, obviously, lots of golf. As I said in episode 1 of this series, golf never stopped for Ian Fleming.
It doesn't for most people who are really into golf.
This is true. Now, I loved this bit he writes in his journal at the time that says, quote, "After a certain age, one must not consort with persons who leave one with a bitter taste in the mind or on the palate. Try and move among people. They may be bores who are douse," which means like sober, gentle, or sedate.
Okay.
"Don't let your face or your mind become stringy with bitterness, or your stomach. Be bland. Be relaxed. Be kind."
Well, there you go.
I like that. I personally relate to that because as time has gone on, I was just talking to my friend about this the other day about how I've become a lot more selective with what I really care to argue with somebody about.
Yeah.
You know?
I get it.
And I think that's sort of what his sentiment here is. It's just like, be bland. Be relaxed. Be kind. Like, that's a good thing to be. You don't have to be...
You don't have to
this
win.
Thing. Yeah, like you can just be a guy that's just there, just sitting.
I know.
You know?
I know. I definitely agree with that.
I do too.
Yeah. I don't know.
I love that he kind of got there, you know.
Well, and be relaxed is like literally what the physical therapist said.
Yeah.
Don't be stiff.
Yeah, I mean, at St. George's, he found his dudes, you know, and by that I mean his group of friends that made him feel like he was back in grade school and with whom he could be himself. Shout out to my dudes, my daddies, Jamie and Akiva. Love you guys. Just had to get that out there. Now, Ian and Anne's relationship continued to deteriorate over the years, increasingly spending more and more time apart. In June of 1962, Ian wrote to Anne from Jamaica saying, quote, "There is so little to be said, or so much. The arguments we've had over the years, our different points of view, are stale, however valid they may be on one side or another. The point lies in only one area. Do we want to go on living together, or do we not? We have been hurting each other to an extent that makes life hardly bearable." But despite all of this, they would stick it out to the bitter end. Now, by this point, it seems that even Ian was becoming aware that his body was starting to fail him and that he didn't have a lot of time left. This sense of impending mortality seems to have grown heavier and heavier as even the bigger moments felt flat to Ian. When the Dr. No movie premiered in the UK that October, Ian says he felt disconnected and indifferent to the buzz going around the room regarding his creation. Rather than soaking in the glow of gushing fans, Ian instead decided to take a trip to Japan. It was on this trip to Japan that Ian would find inspiration for the last novel he would see published in his lifetime. Now, I joked in one of the last episodes about how racist but hilariously fun You Only Live Twice is and how you could never get away with something like it today. But I do have to say that the whole thing does seem to have come from a place of genuine love and respect. Ian's time in Japan was transformative, to say the least. He truly loved Japan, not just in how the culture operated, but in many of their societal principles, like the On principle, which is the deeply rooted idea that you are indebted and grateful to your parents or your grandparents for everything they have done to bring you up, and more specifically, how that debt is so great that it can never be truly repaid. Such was the impression Japan left on him that Ian decided to center his next James Bond book there, which he later titled You Only Live Twice. He even named the Japanese head of the Secret Service, Tiger Tanaka, after a friend who accompanied him on his trip to Japan, a journalist named Tiger Saito.
Okay.
Now, although I can't help but laugh at the name of Bond's love interest, which Ian eye-rollingly named Kissy Suzuki.
Oh my gosh.
Oh man, that's one of the worst ones.
Well, I mean, is Kissy Suzuki as bad as Pussy Galore?
I mean, no, but it's more racist.
I mean, yes.
But once Ian was back in London just before Christmas while checking up with the doctor, as he often did, the medical staff bluntly gave him the devastating news that he had, at most, 5 more years to live. Though Ian felt slightly indifferent when Dr. No premiered in the UK in October of 1962, it made $840,000 in just 2 weeks, which was almost 85% of the film's total budget, and ended up being the 5th most popular movie of the year in the UK. The US release in May of 1963 wasn't too shabby either, raking in more than $2 million at the box offices during its first run, which equates to about $20 million in today's currency. Upon its initial release, the president himself, JFK, organized his own private screening of Dr. No at the White House Theater.
Cool.
Also, quick sidebar, on a slightly more somber note. When the movie version of From Russia with Love was released in the fall of 1963, it was the last movie John F. Kennedy ever watched before leaving for Dallas.
Oh, weird.
Additionally, and strangely, it is believed that both JFK and his assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, were both reading James Bond novels the night before that fateful and tragic day.
Holy moly.
Isn't that wild?
That is wild.
That's how popular Ian Fleming was. The president and his assassin were both reading him the night before.
Think about if his assassin had just, realized we're both reading the same book.
We're not so different, he and I.
But also, we could get into all of the conspiracy theories about that too. Was he even really the assassin?
Now, I will say, if you are curious about that, I will always plug my podcast, guys that I love. Last Podcast on the Left, they did a series on JFK and the assassination.
Of course, they did.
And their their theory of what happened at the end, I won't even give it away because you should all go listen to it. But it is one of the most it is beautifully simple. It completely adds up. It's so much less dramatic than you think it's going to be, but man, I'm convinced. It's like, for me, I'm like, there is a 1% chance that something else happened beyond what this other scenario is saying. Anyway, we'll move on.
So are you going to talk more about his assassination, or is that it?
No.
When JFK was assassinated, obviously they drove away and they were going to drive to the nearest hospital. My grandfather was a neurosurgeon at Presbyterian Hospital in Dallas, and he was on duty that day. But they ended up going to Parkland Hospital, which was much closer, and he was gone the moment it happened, like brains out the back. But it was like, I know that like they got the call, like the president may be coming here or something. So
we won't get into it or whatever. I remember hearing this one detail, which was that when they got JFK to Parkland and the doctors looked at him, there was like a moment where they looked at each other like,
why did they bring him
what do you
here?
guys want from us?
Yeah, like why did you come here?
And the Secret Service went, work on him. It, like forced the surgeons to start working on JFK, even though it was obvious and clear.
Yeah, he was soup's dead.
Yeah. So anyhow, that just makes me sad to think about. So moving on. Over the years, Dr. No would be re-released and often shown as a double feature with the next James Bond movie, and by the end of the 1960s would gross almost $60 million at the box office, which converts to about $600 million in today's currency. Outside of this, United Artists had been hard at work securing deals with various companies to create official James Bond products like tobacco, cologne, clothing, and cars. James Bond wasn't just becoming a screen icon. He was becoming a brand. Mm-hmm. But this was well before the notion that merchandising was where the real money was made, so Ian was left out of all those deals. George Lucas was like the first guy to really understand marketing and merchandising with his stuff.
And actually get money for it.
Yes. And he set the standard, but prior to that, nobody really knew. So Ian, obviously was part of that and didn't have anything to do with the merchandising, unfortunately. Regardless, though, the snowball that is or was James Bond was now beginning to gain speed and grow. Because of the success of Dr. No, United Artists decided to double the budget for the next film, From Russia with Love. All of this increased movie attention led to book sales, and by the end of 1963, more than 7 million copies of Ian's James Bond series would be sold in total. Fans were relieved in 1963 as Ian decided to resort back to his more classic way of writing James Bond novels with On Her Majesty's Secret Service, once again returning to a good old-fashioned Bond adventure rather than the last one, which was told from the perspective of Vivian Michael, like we talked about. As Eon Productions began filming From Russia with Love in April of 1963, Ian was already finishing his revisions on You Only Live Twice. In the summer of that year, the Fleming family moved into their new house in Sevenhampton, which had been under construction for several years, but soon left for a summer holiday. After spending some time with the family in Geneva, Ian decided to drive back to England alone, quote unquote. And by alone, quote unquote, I mean picking up his longtime fling from Jamaica, Blanche Blackwell, who happened to be in Europe.
Old habits die hard.
The two then spent a few extra days romping around Austria, where Ian took her on a mini tour revisiting favorite locations from his youth. In a bittersweet but poetic moment, Ian took Blanche to the top of the Kitzbühler Horn, the mountain he used to regularly climb as a young man while under the care of Ernan Dennis and Phyllis Bottom. The pair took the gondola ride to the peak, but Ian insisted they make their way back down on foot. As they approached the base of the mountain, Ian turned to Blanche and, nearly out of breath, said, quote, "That's the last long walk of Ian Fleming." Isn't that like sad?
Ugh.
Almost prophetically, Ian was right, as from this point, he had just 1 year left to live. Now, while all of this was going on, Anne was continuing to be her usual fairly miserable self. Ian was no picnic either, but to me, Anne just had a special way of being awful. As Ian became more successful, Anne spared no expense. I literally wrote in my thing here, it says, pause for Aubrey to make Jurassic Park reference.
Spared no expense.
Thank you. I was like, you're killing me here, Smalls. Like, I wrote this in for you to say it.
Spared no expense.
Spared no expense.
John Hammond, folks.
So as Ian
the fictional character, John Hammond.
Played by the legendary Richard Attenborough.
Yes, not David Attenborough, his brother.
His brother. So as Ian became more successful, Anne spared no expense and did her best to spend money every way she possibly could. In a letter sent to a friend at the time, she writes about using what she refers to as, quote, our pornography fund.
Oh, yeah, because she called the books pornography.
And says, quote, it's so exhausting spending Ian's trust money. I squander £1,000 per day and envy the poor.
Whoa, £1,000 a day?
A day, and I envy the poor.
Ugh.
Like this. Among her many purchases, one of my favorites was an original portrait painting of
Queen Victoria.
Queen Victoria.
I knew it!
By Scottish artist Sir David Wilkie.
Oh.
And I did find the painting, Aubrey. I have it on my sources list, and you can go and check it out.
Yay!
Super cool.
I wonder if I saw it. I just didn't,
You
register.
might have. I don't know. It is worth noting that Anne also describes Ian's current mental state as, quote, permanent angry misery. And it does seem that his declining medical status was making him slightly worse, not better.
Well, when you don't feel good, you don't act good.
No, this is sad and funny. Such was the openness of his depression that one of their frequent house guests, Peter Cannell, started a quote-unquote gloom book, where other guests of the Fleming house were invited to write their favorite gloomy Ian quote from that day's festivities.
Oh my gosh.
So Ian would basically say like a Debbie Downer quote, and they'd be like, write that down in the book.
Oh my gosh. I mean, that's hysterical, a little bit mean. But like kind of, I mean,
It's
where
funny and
is
sad.
that gloom book these days, I wonder.
Oh, I wonder. I don't know what happened to it. I bet you it's somewhere around.
I mean, it's
Ian's
obviously
Fleming estate or
somewhere,
something
but like
that.
that's pretty funny.
Now, From Russia with Love premiered in October of 1963 with worldwide release set for April of 1964 and was an even bigger hit than Dr. No, pulling in $12.5 million initially and more than $78 million in total after re-release later that year, which all translates to about $775 million in today's currency. It's a big movie.
Yeah.
I mean, that's big.
No, I mean, yeah, that's a lot.
Now, though the London premiere was grand, with Ian occupying the entire front row for himself and friends, the whole thing was again lost on him, and he found himself wishing the entire thing would be over. During the after party, he told his old pal William Plomer, quote, I can't bear these tests. I get claustrophobic in a face that aches with insincere smiles.
Put it in the book.
Put it in the book. His health was continuing to be a source of misery for him as well, finding his daily energy levels dipping with each passing day. None of this was aided by the lawsuits Ian was dealing with, which I have mentioned in the past. This was all related back to Thunderball. Another small but important event took place in March of 1964. After the overwhelming success of James Bond as an entire series, Ian found that tons of his money was being eaten up in taxes.
Well, yeah.
I'll spare the details, but basically, British taxes being what they were, the best thing for Ian's production company to do was split ownership, which would mitigate taxes. His production company, Glidrose Productions, which held the legal rights for publishing James Bond, was currently 100% owned by Ian. To help spare himself on taxes, he sold 51% of his production company to the Booker Group, which was a financial firm partly owned by Ian's close personal friend and regular golf buddy, Sir Jacques Campbell. Now, whether Ian meant to do this or not, this sale would actually give the world James Bond novels forevermore, as the Booker Group began to license the character of James Bond to be used and written by new writers after Ian Fleming's death. All told, Ian would be responsible for 12 James Bond novels and 9 short stories. As of 2024, the Booker Group have published 26 James Bond novels under new authors, 11 young James Bond spin-off books, 7 novelizations of the film, 3 James Bond short stories, and 3 Moneypenny Diaries, which are little spin-offs, in addition to 1 authorized biography of James Bond. And by the way, if anyone is curious, Ian sold his 51% stake for just £100,000. And the Booker Group is able to use this indiscriminately moving forward because they own 51%. But again, I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing because
He
Ian
was on his
basically
way
got
out. You can't take it with you.
And he got £1 million, and it basically set up so that 49% of the company would still be in the Fleming Trust for publishing. And people could continue to use the character of James Bond for generations.
Which is what he wanted. He wanted it to live on.
And so it all actually, in my opinion, was
Because you only
for
live
the
twice.
best. Well done. I hate you.
I love these sorts of things.
Okay.
Wait, and I'm sorry, he sold it for 100,000 pounds or £1 million?
100,000, which
okay, but then you
equates to about
convert it to $1 million
now.
today. Yes,
Yes,
because
yes.
I noticed that the math was just 10 times
Yeah, it's about 10 times from that
at
point.
this point in
Yes.
life.
Now, after the release of From Russia with Love, by late 1963, Ian Fleming was a household name. For context, he was given the nickname of Thunder Beetle in reference to him being a fifth member of the Beatles.
Because he was so cool.
He was so popular and so
popular.
cool and so of the modern times that they were like, dude, Thunder Beetle over here.
I did not know that.
Unbelievable, right? Movie theater marquees didn't just read From Russia with Love and then the Showtimes. More often than not, they would read Ian Fleming's From Russia with Love and then the Showtime.
That's really cool.
That's how popular he was.
Well, so because like let's think about like a book that has such popularity. Maybe the Harry Potter series, for example. I don't think the marquee would have said J.K. Rowling's the Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, even though I think she is not maybe a household name. I think most people
she's a bigger name than him.
Yeah, if you knew if it was like name an author of a big series, you'd say that. Maybe Tolkien,
or maybe like Tom Clancy, or like Agatha Christie.
Yeah.
Like there's only so many names.
Yeah.
Of that kind of. I mean, recently it's like Brandon Sanderson is up there. He's like on top of the world.
See, I don't know who that is.
Oh, he's like the new big fiction, like fantasy writer kind of thing.
Is that the one of the book that your wife gave me? No, I haven't read it yet because I've been reading
a bunch
other
of different ones. I can't remember which.
Okay. Anyway, we digress.
Okay, now where was I? In the UK, Ian's last Bond novel, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, had already sold more than 75,000 hardback copies, and back in the States, publishers had ordered the printing of 10 million paperback copies of various Bond books in the wake of the latest movie's success. The Thunderball legal case was finally settled, with Ian's side throwing in the towel and the judge awarding the plaintiff, the people that were suing Ian, full rights to Thunderball completely. Okay. Both on the book and the movie. Okay. You kind of think it from Ian's perspective. He was like,
whatever.
Okay,
I've already.
right.
Yeah,
He's like, I got
you can have it.
millions more and whatever.
There's more where that came from.
Now, I didn't get into it at all. Yada, yada, yada. Know that Ivor Bryce was also involved in this lawsuit because he was trying to help Ian get Thunderball made. Ivor Bryce back in the 50s was also trying to produce some movies. I didn't really get into it. But one little teeny silver lining I will say is that through this legal battle, he did have Ivor at his side.
He had a friend along for the ride,
through the
for
entire
him.
kind of
helping
kind of
for
thing.
him, helping him.
So just wanted to at least kind of acknowledge that. Now, this ruling only seemed to exacerbate Ian's increasingly poor health, despite what I just said, for which he was now regularly taking an assortment of pills to aid with his pain and ailments. Even while he began the writing process of The Man with the Golden Gun in Jamaica, he found himself only able to write for an hour and a half before needing to stop and rest. He'd normally do 4 hours at a time.
Yeah.
However, one small but happy little meeting took place during this visit to Goldeneye from ornithologist James Bond. Yes, the man whose book Ian had stared at while writing Casino Royale was by chance in Jamaica and decided to pay Ian a visit, to which Ian was pleased, saying he was happy to finally meet, quote, the real James Bond.
Aww.
Sadly, though, this would be the final visit that Ian Fleming would make to his beloved Jamaica. Coming to an end here. Now, when Ian got back to England in March, You Only Live Twice was setting publishing records for Cape Publishing with 62,000 advanced orders, which was twice as many as the last book.
Remember how the first run of his first book was 4,750 or something like that? Yeah.
It's amazing that he's like, yeah, okay, now we're doubling from 31,000 to 62,000. It's like, jeez, man. Now, in early April, just after Easter, Ian caught a cold and started to develop a fever.
This is 1964?
This is 1964, I believe, yes.
Was it 6 months after JFK died or a year and 6 months?
So Ian Fleming would have died less than a year after JFK died.
Okay.
JFK was assassinated.
So it was 64.
November
63.
63,
yeah.
I want to say. Yeah, we'll see what
64.
happens here.
I was just trying to keep track.
So yeah, and this might have been like, no, this would have been early 64. Yeah, you're right. I was trying to think about when it was. So again, he had caught a cold just after Easter and had started to develop a fever. Despite Anne's protests and astute observation that the weather was cold and rainy, Ian insisted on going out for a round of golf with his buddies. When the round was over, his buddies told him it might be a good idea to dry off and maybe take a bath to warm up, but Ian shrugged everyone off and drove all the way back to London in cold, wet clothes. The next day, Ian developed a condition called pleurisy, which is an inflammation of an organ called the pleura. The pleura is like a membrane that helps lubricate our breathing functions, so when it gets inflamed, it stops lubricating and makes it painful to draw every breath. Not long after this, Ian checked into Sister Agnes's, which is now renamed the King Edward the Seventh. I have to do Roman numerals here. King Edward the Seventh's hospital, where he would spend the next 3 months recovering. But during his stay, his doctors told him even more bad news. He now had pulmonary embolisms, which are clots forming in his lungs, which again decreased their estimate for his life expectancy. Once discharged from the hospital, Ian decided to make camp at a hotel in Brighton to further aid his recovery and be closer to his mother.
Oh, she's still alive.
Eve, who is now 79 years old.
I guess she's not that old, but she's old for the time, maybe.
Was only a few blocks away, as her wealthy Bahama daddy husband had died a few years earlier. She had since moved back to the UK after suffering a stroke, and then took up residence at a hotel in Brighton, different hotel from Ian, just down the street. Despite all of his success, including just a week or so earlier learning he had sold over 1 million books in the UK and now 30 million books worldwide, he was still unhappy and spent most of his days alone, sitting on a bench by the ocean and staring off into the sea. Anne tended to stay away, as she noticed her presence only worsened his condition, to which his friends actually agreed. By this point, he only liked to see his old friends William Plomer, Cyril Connolly, Ivor Bryce, and maybe just a few others. Ian's condition definitely didn't improve on July 27th, when after suffering yet another stroke, his mother Eve passed away in the early hours of the morning. Amaryllis, Peter, and Richard Fleming were all at Eve's bedside when she passed, as they had all been notified the day before of her condition. But Ian, who was also not long for this world and too weak to move around much, was not. When Amaryllis stopped by Ian's hotel room to break the news, she noted to Peter afterwards that an aura of death surrounded Ian. Peter refused to believe it. As the sun began to set on his life, Ian's mind also began to leave him as he started to develop an inexplicable phobia of the number 13 and the color black, and would make rapid changes to his home decor, replacing black items with red ones, or trinkets whose decorations numbered 13 in count would be sold off or given away. Perhaps most strangely, he started to hate the sun and would only allow himself to be outside in the shade, which resulted in him carrying a large umbrella everywhere he went. About a week after his mother's death, while accompanying a friend on some errands, he asked if they could make a stop at a church on the way, where he sat and prayed, asking for his sins to be forgiven, probably a first for him in more than 30 years. After church, they stopped by an antique store, where Ian purchased a painting for Anne. She may have frustrated him, but his love for her never stopped. A week after this, on August 11th, Ian insisted that he and Anne go down to his beloved Royal St. George's Golf Club for lunch, which was then followed up by, a few hours later, with a dinner at the hotel. But the day proved to be too strenuous, and after dinner at about 9 p.m., Ian suffered another heart attack and collapsed on the floor. The ambulance got to the hospital by 9:30, and for the next 3 hours and 45 minutes, the medical staff treated Ian, but all in vain, as by 1:30 a.m., August 12th, 1964, Ian Fleming was pronounced dead. His last words were uttered while in the ambulance, spoken to the paramedics as he said, quote, "I am sorry to trouble you chaps. I don't know how you got along so fast with the traffic on the roads these days." That was his last words, was him saying, "I'm really stoked you guys got here despite the traffic."
And sorry to bother you. Sorry you had to come in the first place.
Come and do this, because I know traffic is bad. It's so sad. To add to the tragedy, it just so happens that August 12th was his son Casper's 12th birthday. It seems that in every possible way, Ian wanted to outdo his father, as, if you'll remember, Ian's father Val died just 1 week before Ian would have turned 9. Upon receiving news of his death, most news outlets were kind, with my favorite coming from the BBC's World of Books that says, quote, "His work ignores the most wholesome range of human emotion and rational behavior. But he was a great writer. The most stupendous set piece, the sensuous phrase were always at his fingertips. His peer is the Stevenson of Treasure Island and Kidnapped, and Fleming alone comes close to offering us something more deeply allegorical than either of those books. Something much nearer in importance to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde."
Huh. That is
Pretty cool, right?
high praise.
High praise. At Ian's funeral 3 days later, Anne arrived late, causing the priest to give his blessings to Ian's sister-in-law by mistake. At the memorial service a few days later, Amaryllis played cello, and his old friend William Plover gave an emotional speech saying, quote, "Let us remember Ian when he was on top of the world, with his foot on the accelerator, laughing at absurdities, enjoying discoveries, absorbed by his many interests and plans, fascinated and amused by places and people and facts and fantasies, an entertainer of millions, and for us, a friend never to be forgotten."
I'm just trying to not cry. I've been
Isn't
doing
it
it for like a
emotional?
couple minutes.
But what happened after Ian died? For Anne, things weren't great. She never quite recovered from Ian's death and seemed to be a bit of a nervous wreck from then on. Ian had tied up most of his money in various trusts, mostly aimed at giving Casper as much money as possible. But again, Ian was bad with contracts, it seems, and the legal spiderweb he created caused huge delays in doling out the cash. But Anne always seemed to get by just fine by doing things like selling Ian's prized rare book collection to the University of Indiana in 1968.
At least she sold it to a university.
At least. And to add fairness, it is said that when his old buddy Percy Muir, who initially got him into book collecting, he came to help Anne pack up the books and sell them to the university.
Okay.
And when she was doing it, she was like, "I don't know if I can do this." And Percy Muir had to be the one that was like, "I hate to say this,
But you kind of have to.
you already signed the contract."
Well, and part of it too was he'd kind of put all these weird contracts in place, and so like, what was she supposed to do? Like,
Exactly.
Was it so that they wouldn't lose Goldeneye? Like, I mean,
no, Goldeneye was bought and paid for already.
okay,
So that
like,
was already
but like,
in the trust.
but like, still, it's like you gotta.
She didn't have cash flow. She didn't have much access to the trust.
Right.
So
he
she had
should have
limited
done.
money.
He should have done a better job of something that would be like readily accessible to her or something.
Yes.
But she probably. I don't even know. Like, she couldn't have a credit card at that time. I know.
Yeah.
So I don't know if she could have had a bank account. She probably could have, but like, still, like, you know.
Yeah, I don't know, but yeah. So I just want to put that out there to again, to give a little fairness. It wasn't like she was just like, "Yes, forget him.
I'm just
Get it
gonna
outta
sell his
here."
stuff. Forget him.
She did love him. She really did
Yeah.
love him. They just had a really complicated and really kind of troubling relationship. It's complicated, like many things are, right?
Interesting that the University of Indiana was the one that
know.
bought it.
But I guess they wanted an improvement
A bunch
to their
of
library, you know
rare
what I mean?
books.
Yeah. Anne, by the way, would eventually die of cancer in 1981 at the age of 68.
So how old was he when he died?
54, 55? I think 54.
4 or 55.
Yeah, fairly
Okay.
young.
Okay. Yeah. No. Yeah.
Now, as for little Casper, life was tough. The 1960s proved to be very influential on him, and by the time he was 17, he had been expelled from Eton College after 2 separate police instances involving Casper's illegal collection of black market firearms.
Okay.
When Casper was 21, the legal issues were finally sorted, and he was able to access his trust fund money, which included the Goldeneye property in Jamaica. So, a 21-year-old with a place to live in Jamaica and all the money that he could possibly want.
That sounds like a great setup.
Really, really good combination. This only aided his growing drug habit, which fueled the fires of his growing depression. Anne tried to get Casper help, which included hospitalization and electroshock therapy. But finally, after several previous attempts, on October 2nd, 1975, Casper Fleming took his own life by drug overdose, leaving behind a simple note that read, quote, "If it is not this time, it will be the next."
Ooh.
He was just 23 years old. That makes me really, really sad. I gotta be honest with you. But to lighten it up, I guess, a little bit before we end our series here. As for the James Bond legacy, Ian did not live long enough to see his secret agent character become the cultural icon that he is today. When the film version of Thunderball was released in 1965, it was an absolute smash hit. And if you adjust for inflation, it still sits, to this day, as the 32nd highest grossing film of all time, just above The Dark Knight and only 2 spots below The Avengers. That's Thunderball, man. Like that's.
But
I didn't know
Thunderball
that.
was the one that they didn't even own, right?
He wouldn't have gotten any of the
got
profits
nothing from it
He wouldn't
because
have.
that's crazy.
But it almost didn't even matter because he was set.
Yeah, he
James
was
Bond
set.
off
It
to the
didn't
races
really
by
matter,
that
but
point.
that's crazy. It's interesting too that it was so. Was it the highest of the Bond films?
Yes.
So that's
If you adjust
interesting.
for inflation, it is to this day still.
That's interesting because they didn't have control over the production. The production company of all the Bond things didn't have control over the production of that, and it did better.
So they did, because what ended up happening is just because the guy that was suing Ian got the rights, all he had was the rights. He still had to find somebody that could sell it. And so Ian had the filming rights to James Bond as a series, so this guy still had to sell the rights to Thunderball to Eon Productions specifically. So it was
Oh,
this
so it kind of like
weird-
went back.
Yes.
Interesting.
All it was basically saying, Ian, you're just middled out of this. You don't
Okay.
get to be a part of this anymore because this was developed in conjunction with these other people. So
Okay,
that's kind of
that's interesting. Golly, contract stuff is crazy.
I know, it's wild. Now, also in 1965, trademark contracts were finally signed all around, and before you knew it, you could get everything from a James Bond action figure to James Bond toothpaste. Through the years, the phenomenon of James Bond has only continued to grow around the world. The impact of James Bond in the UK is almost beyond belief, as in the 2012 London Olympics, the Queen of England herself, Queen Elizabeth II, agreed to have James Bond, then portrayed by actor Daniel Craig, to personally escort her via speedboat down the River Thames to the Olympic Stadium as part of the opening ceremonies.
I remember that.
It was awesome.
It was so awesome.
To date, 7 actors have portrayed Secret Agent 007 across almost 7 decades, including Sean Connery, David Niven, George Lazenby, Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan, and Daniel Craig, with a new James Bond actor expected to be announced any day. If you're listening to this in the future, maybe you already know who the next James Bond is. Regarding the movies, in 1995, just a year before his death, Albert R. Broccoli, who parted ways with Harry Saltzman in the mid-70s, handed over control to his daughter, Barbara Broccoli, and Barbara's half-brother, Michael G. Wilson, who are both still running Eon Productions to this day.
Very cool. Also, I like that alliterative Barbara Broccoli.
Barbara Broccoli.
That was not a missed opportunity there.
That's a good one. Now, I don't even need to give any further detail on why Ian Fleming is important. If you're listening to this podcast, I'd give about a 99.99% chance that you not only know who James Bond is, but you've seen at least one James Bond movie. I'd be willing to bet all of you have fond memories going to the movies with your parents or your siblings or your best friends or on a date when you were a teenager just to see the new Bond flick, if nothing else than to see a spectacle on the big screen. I can personally vouch that a rite of passage for almost all 21-year-old men in America is ordering a vodka martini, shaken, not stirred, in the early days of drinking at bars. I'll also never forget going to prom at 17, seeing my friend William Thorne in a white tux, which was not popular at the time, and asking, "Dude, what's up with the white tux?" To which William responded, "I went to the tux rental place and said to the guy, just make me look like James Bond." We've covered a lot of ground on Ian Fleming. We've seen him do great things and we've seen him do stupid things. We've seen him treat people with the utmost courtesy and friendship, and we've seen the mean, ugly side of his personality that treated people with callous disregard. But I love the story of Ian Fleming, not because he was specifically a great man, but because he never gave up in spite of his flaws, his self-doubt, and his emotional baggage. Whether he meant to or not, Ian gave generations across the world an imperfect hero that we all continue to root for in spite of his shortcomings, which in a way gives us all something to root for together, regardless of age, race, or nationality. So as we come to a close on this exciting life, I say we all take a moment to remember the good times that James Bond has given us all and raise a glass, preferably a Vesper, not to Secret Agent 007, but to a man by the name of Fleming. Ian Fleming. Yay!
I don't know how to clap into the microphone properly.
And that's it. We've done it. We've gotten to the end of Ian Fleming, everybody. Congratulations. I hope you feel accomplished and learned.
If you want to tell your friends about this, I'm going to quote my own father before we were seeing Skyfall.
Ooh, okay.
I don't know if I said this before in an earlier episode. My dad and I went to go see Skyfall when it came out. And we were sitting there waiting for like the movie to start. And he turns to me and he goes, "I'm afraid you're going to enjoy this very much."
I like it. It's a very James Bond line.
I know. "I'm afraid you're going to enjoy this very much."
Yeah, you're going to enjoy this very much, Mr. Bond.
So tell your friends, because I don't know. I mean, I remember when we started with Maple Dodge, I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. And then when you're the person doing the research and stuff, it's fun. But I mean, I'm not going to lie. It's more fun to be on the receiving end of the information. I think personally.
It depends. So I can't sit still. I've already started into my next series.
No, I know.
And I got to tell you, in the first 10 pages, I found this... I can't even talk about it, but let's just say a piece of history that I've always been dead curious about where this stuff came from. And it was like, oh, here it is.
It's kind of amazing what you come across when you just are randomly, I mean, you don't even know. Yeah.
Really amazing stuff.
I don't know. I just thought after Mabel's series, I was like, wow, she was so interesting and I'd never heard of her. And like, this is going to be like the best one. And then I definitely am like, okay, Ian Fleming is also the best one. And like, I don't know. I
think I'm with you, and it's okay. So
they're all going to be the best one.
They all have so. I just love the stuff. I can't talk about much of this stuff enough. But I think my thing with every person, the reason that we get to them and go, oh, this is amazing, is because it's sort of like, I keep hearing this sentiment about how people don't understand when the good times are the good times. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? It's like it's too late and then it's gone, kind of a thing. I read through these people's lives and I go like, your whole life was a good time and you didn't even know it. And it makes me reflect on my own life in that same way and go, maybe I'm having a good time all of this time as well and I don't even know it. I just have to have the story of my life written in this sort of way that goes like, holy crap, you knew all these people and did all these different things and were all these different places and like I don't know. I'm totally with you. I knew this was going to be an interesting story. I knew that at the very least I could get into his time in World War II and I'd be like, ooh, fun. I had no idea the scope of all the other stuff and how cool it was.
It's like he was a guy with a life in 3 acts. He kind of had his upbringing and then he had his spy type stuff and then he had James Bond.
I think you're right.
I don't know. Pretty cool.
Pretty fun.
Yeah, we good job, Daniel. Good job again.
Well, thank you.
Hear, hear.
As we wrap up though, we'll get to the end of this series here. First and foremost, Aubrey, you have an important announcement on who your next series is going to be. So take it away.
Yeah. Okay. So I feel like my people are less exciting. It seems like you're following a secret agent man, literally. But I am going back further in time than I did before. And we're going to Abigail Adams, the wife of John Adams.
I will personally say I'm very excited for this. I didn't read all of it, but I read a good portion of, there was a very famous John Adams biography that came out like 15 years ago, something like that. I read a good amount of it and was like, man, John Adams seems like an amazing and cool and awesome dude. And it made me really upset when I watched the Hamilton musical and they like at one point make a bash on John Adams and he's like really boring and stuff. And I was like, guys, no, he was good. He did good things. And I know that Abigail was a massive part of that. I just don't really know how. So I'm really excited
tune in to find out that she was known sometimes as Mrs. President.
That makes sense.
I won't say anything. I'll save it for the next one. But I think it'll be very exciting. I don't know. It'll be interesting.
I think it's going to be amazing.
I think it's going to be great. But it's interesting when you're trying to research who you're going to do because you need to make sure there's enough material out there to cover the person in the first place. Yeah. So it's interesting. There's a bookstore in Dallas called Half Price Books, and when I go back to Dallas, a lot of times I'll just go to the biography section to look around and see who has a couple biographies. And that's where I actually stumbled across Abigail Adams, because I was like, oh yeah, I guess, yeah, okay, I'll do that. I also have on order right now.
Should you say?
No.
Okay.
No. This is about Abigail Adams.
Okay.
I was looking for a specific other book to support my research, but I came across, I don't know what it's going to be. It was like $4, but I came across one of those books that you'd get as an elementary or middle school kid about the childhood of Abigail Adams. So it's coming in the mail. I just thought that would be an interesting supplement to my research for a few bucks.
Totally, dude.
So anyway, but yes, next time on the Biographers podcast.
Series 4.
Series 4, Abigail Adams.
And it'll also be episode 20.
It will be, episode 20.
Which
there we go.
is friggin' wild.
That is crazy. I'm not sure how many episodes will be in this series yet. We'll find out soon.
Yeah. Well, I suppose we should wrap it up here. This is probably already going to be a little bit of a long episode. Actually, I didn't feel like it was going to be as long
we
as...
did okay.
I think we did okay.
I shut my trap a lot. Except I couldn't hold back on Harry Broccoli.
I know, I love it. No, I didn't want you to not talk.
No.
We have so much to get through.
We had a lot to get through. We had a lot to get through.
So first thing I guess I'll say, even before we get into any type of sponsor stuff, which we have very, very little of anyways, just wanted to give another thank you to all of our listeners out there. I got to be honest with you and tell you, it's been pretty overwhelming. We've started to kind of blow up a little bit, and we don't really know how. We've talked about this last episode.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. It's exponential.
To the point where we're actually having conversations about how this might become our full-time job soon, which is just beyond belief for me personally. So again, bottom of my heart, everybody, for listening. Thank you. This is something I love to do, and I know Aubrey does as well. So yeah, just wanted to express some gratitude for all of you lovely people for taking the time to listen to us.
Yeah, we've gotten a couple emails from some people, and that's fun.
Oh, actually, I was like, I want to do this because these people, they're the first people to do it. It made me happy. Okay, so first... the first person we've ever gotten an email from as seeming like a fan, we're just going to say a first name, Candace. Candace, you know who you are. I won't say your last name just for protection for you, but you were our first email ever.
Thanks, Candace.
Saying hello. And then we got another one from a person named Cammie, who was recommending a movie to us when she was going through the Queen Victoria series. So Cammie, if you ever listen to this episode here, if you get to this point, I know you're still working through Queen Victoria, but hello, and thanks for sending us a little email. It just makes our little hearts happy and sing, and you were all great. So yeah, just want to say thanks to all our little fans that are out there that are seemingly continuing to grow, which is blowing my mind. After that, I'll say a couple ads here. First and foremost, everybody go and check out metalwork.miola.com. That is metalwork, singular, by Miola, M-E-O-L-A. Use the code biographers at checkout to get 10% off. This is for all of your chef's knives and custom knives needs. Go check it out. There's lots of pictures online, and sky's kind of the limit on what you can do and what you can talk to about the maker there in terms of what you want to have. Number 2, like always, we'd like to give a little shout out to McQueen Pipes. They're an affiliate partner of ours to where we basically get a little cut of any of the sales that go through us. So check out McQueenPipes.com, MACQUEEN Pipes.com. Use the code biographers at checkout there. You're going to get 15% off, and we get a little kickback as well. That's for all things, all smoking preferences, pipe related. Very beautiful, handmade, craftsman stuff. Anything else, Alberito?
I don't know. I don't think so.
I think we're good.
Yeah.
Right on.
I'm sad to be finished with Ian Fleming, but on to the next.
Onwards and upwards, and I'm already getting excited about the next series I'm gonna be doing too. So, all right. Well, I guess we'll end it there. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time for Series 4 on Abigail Adams.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to The Biographers. For more information, please visit thebiographerspodcast.com.